Hello, I'm Mario Toneguzzi, Managing Editor of Canada's Entrepreneur. Joining me today is Phil Soper, President and CEO of Royal LePage. Thanks for joining us today, Phil.
Pleasure.
Well, we're only a couple of days away from the federal election on Monday, April 28th. Royal LePage has done a survey on Canadians and how they feel about the upcoming election and housing issues. Um, in a nutshell, what did that survey tell you, or what was most important about that survey?
Well, we knew anecdotally that housing was an important issue for Canadians. Now we've quantified it. It is 55% of Canadians say it is very important in their choice of candidate party for the upcoming federal election. Uh, but it differs quite widely by age group.
Hmm. And
So
can you?
yeah, if you dive into the generations, starting with Generation Z, so our youngest homeowners, our home prospective homeowners, many of them first-time home buyers, many of them are coming from Generation Z. Over 70% of people said, critical to my choice of who I vote for. If you move to millennials, those kind of mid or early 30s to mid 40s types. They are over 60%, but or around 60%, but a good over 10% lower than the Generation Z. You drop to Generation X, slightly older, and it's about half, and you get the baby boomers, people like you and I, and it's under half. So it's pretty clear that the younger people are, the more worried they are about getting into a home, because other research, not in this particular study, but other research we have done shows that Generation Z and millennials have the same intents. They want to become homeowners, not surprisingly.
So, in your experience in the real estate sector, have you ever come across this in the past where housing has become such an important issue for people?
Yeah, it's often a huge issue at the municipal election level.
Uh,
And arguably that's where most of the heavy lifting gets done. That's where the building permits are issued. That's where, the urban planning, laying out housing occurs. But as Canada has grown in size, as households have gotten smaller. So interesting, people think that the stress on the supply of homes in Canada is due strictly to our growing population, immigration, and new babies. A big part of it is there are fewer and fewer people living per house. Back in our grandparents' day, the average Canadian home had six people in it. When I was a kid, it was four. We've dropped to two. There are a lot of one and two people households in this country. So, if you move from four to two, you need twice as many houses or condos or residences. So there's lots of things putting pressure on housing supply that has caused house prices to climb at a faster rate than wages and salaries over the last 20 years, increasing in problem right till about 3 years ago. And then the post-pandemic era, house prices stopped appreciating in many parts of the country and sort of we've been stable for 3 years, but people are still worried about that elevated level of cost, and it's translating into, well, election issues at the federal level.
So, when you look at what's out there, have the political parties responded to what Canadians are looking for and its policies regarding the housing sector?
It's not an easy problem to solve.
Uh,
And therefore, particularly among the two leading parties, the Liberals and the Conservatives, the policies have a lot of commonality. They're dressed up differently, but they're pretty similar. The NDP, who are way back in the polls this this time along and are unlikely to have a huge impact on housing policy. They're focusing on what you might call social or affordable rental housing, but both the leading parties are listening to Canadians. And they're basically saying, listen, we know that you want to own your home if you can, if possible. So we're going to find ways to speed up development. The Liberals have put more focus on financial incentives or loans to developers, whereas the Conservatives have put more focus on things like converting federal buildings to housing and providing different kinds of incentives to create more property. But when you step right back, both leading parties are trying to stimulate development, reduce regulation, speed up the time that housing gets built. Now, I will say, as someone who's been a lobbyist in this space for some time, given my role, that there's a huge difference between making promises and executing on those promises. Dating back through the Trudeau and Harper years, there were lots of election promises related to housing that, and billions of dollars allocated in principle to accelerating the pace of home construction in this country. And a lot of it has never been executed because it's just so difficult or other priorities slipped in. So I think whoever takes the mantle in next week's and is our next prime minister, they actually have to focus early and ferociously on executing on these promises to build the homes that Canadians need to live in.
Now, refresh my memory, but that every year, doesn't the industry come to Ottawa and kind of lobby and talk to government and officials?
Yeah, the on a provincial level, most provincial real estate associations have tight relationships with the provincial legislatures, and they have political action days. They call them PAC days on a provincial basis. And federally, the Canadian Real Estate Association does the same thing with members of parliament. We're pretty good in Canada at being, party neutral and focusing on the issues. In the United States, it can be very different. Trade associations line up behind one party or the other, and they get shut out when the government changes. Whereas in Canada, lobbying tends to be at the government in office, regardless of stripe. And I will say one of the big advantages we haven't completely taken advantage of, but that we do have in Canada versus the US, is our civil service doesn't get fired when there's a change in government. In the United States, there's hundreds of thousands of people lose their jobs every time the party in the White House changes or the party in Congress. And our civil servants do a good job of remaining party neutral.
Yeah. So, in a nutshell, Phil, from the real estate industry's perspective, like what is it that you would like to see whoever is in government? What would you like to see them do to help the industry?
I think the biggest thing is reducing the time it takes to go from idea to actually handing the keys over to a family when creating new homes, be they a suburban single family neighborhood or a city center apartment condo tower, and be it for rental or purchase. We just need to reduce the time. And what that does is it reduce cost, because when a developer, when it takes 10 years, which is pretty common in our big cities to get a multi-residential project underway, when it takes 10 years, that means that it's almost, I liken it to scotch makers. people like 10, 12-year-old scotch and things. You're bottling today, but you're not going to see revenue for over a decade.
Yeah.
There's risk in that. And when you're talking about uh, building whole neighborhoods or huge towers, it's huge risk. So they tend to be conservative because it takes too long. They have to borrow money for too long. The economy can change. 10 years ago, the economy was a very different place than it is today. Who saw this unnecessary trade war coming? This
Yeah.
sort of thing. So if we could reduce it to half, if it took half as long, it would cut costs, it would reduce risk, and we'd start narrowing the gap between the amount of housing we need for Canadians and the amount of new housing that is being developed.
All right, wonderful. Thanks so much, Phil, for joining us today.
My pleasure, Mayor, as always.
All right, that was Phil Soper, who is President and CEO of Royal LePage. I'm Mario Toneguzzi, Managing Editor of Canada's Entrepreneur. Thanks for joining us today.